Look at the sleek $80,000 diesel trucks sitting in service bays today, and then look at a faded, rusted 1990s Ford F-250 working a cattle ranch. You think that shiny new rig is the superior machine. But Ford has a dirty secret they do not want you to calculate. Modern factory emissions packages and extreme injection pressures are designed to cycle these new trucks straight into the junkyard before they hit six figures, while an army of beat-up 7.3-liter Power-Stroke diesels is quietly crossing the million-mile mark all across America. I have spent over 15 years on the shop floor tearing down these engines, and I have seen exactly how manufacturers traded mechanical longevity for planned obsolescence. Most buyers at local auctions glance at a faded truck with 300,000 miles, see a little bed rust, and keep walking right past the greatest heavy-duty engine ever dropped into a consumer pickup. They do not realize they are walking away from a commercial-grade Navistar International power plant built with cast iron heads and a massive 920-pound block that laughs at the kind of stress that destroys modern aluminum components. The heart of this unkillable design lies in how it feeds itself: fuel. In 1994, Ford introduced the Hydraulic Electronic Unit Injector System, or HUI, and it completely revolutionized diesel reliability by eliminating the traditional high-wear mechanical injection pump. I have pulled apart these HUI systems after decades of abuse, and the engineering is pure genius. Instead of relying on fragile fuel-lubricated components that fail the moment you get a bad batch of dry, low-sulfur diesel, the 7.3 uses its own heavy engine oil to generate injection force, your high-pressure oil pump, which we techs call the H-pop, crams engine oil into the system at 3,000 pounds per square inch. That oil slams into an internal injector plunger with a 7-to-1 surface area ratio, multiplying that force into a staggering 21,000 psi of fuel pressure right at the nozzle tip. You get precise atomization without a fragile common rail setup. If a modern common rail injector fails, it can torch a hole right through your piston in seconds and stick you with an $8,000 repair bill. If a 7.3 injector acts up, it simply runs a bit rough, and a replacement costs a fraction of the price. You might look at the factory power ratings of 210 to 275 horsepower and think this engine is lazy compared to modern numbers. But here is what Ford doesn't tell you. High horsepower numbers sell trucks, but low RPM torque sustains engines. The 7.3 punches out up to 525 pound-feet of torque, and it delivers that muscle between 600 and 2,000 RPM. It lumbers along like a freight train, building heat slowly and putting virtually zero stress on its rotating assembly. Unlike a high-strung modern diesel that has to rev hard while choking on its own recirculated exhaust gases, I have personally inspected verified million-mile trucks, like Peter Mudler's famous 1997 F-250 that achieved that milestone on the completely original, unopened factory block. But if you want to find one of these legends for under $6,000 before the rest of the market dries up, you have to know how to navigate the two distinct generations of this engine. The first generation, running from 1994 to 1997, sits inside what the diesel community calls the OBS, or old body style trucks. These square-body workhorses utilize single-shot injectors, meaning they deliver fuel in one massive, clean spray per combustion cycle. I love these trucks for their brutal simplicity and crisp throttle response. If you plan to tune your truck for extra power, these single-shot injectors are incredibly efficient and respond beautifully to simple software modifications. The second generation arrived in 1999 with the Super Duty lineup, adding an air-to-air intercooler to drop intake temperatures and packing up to 275 horsepower from the factory. These engines switched to split-shot injectors, which break the fuel delivery into two smaller pulses to quiet down the combustion rattle. It makes for a smoother, quieter daily driver, but you sacrifice a bit of that raw performance potential found in the older OBS models. There is a massive hidden factory pitfall inside these later engines that you must verify before handing over your cash. In 2001, Ford quietly switched the internal manufacturing process from ultra-strong forged steel connecting rods to powdered metal connecting rods. If you keep the engine completely stock, those powdered metal rods will run forever. But the moment you install a hot aftermarket tune, which almost every diesel owner ends up doing, those powdered metal rods hit a catastrophic failure threshold right around 450 horsepower. Push past that limit, and those rods will snap like toothpicks, sending a chunk of metal screaming through your engine block and turning your unkillable motor into a 920-pound paperweight. If you have any desire to build a high horsepower rig, you need to target the 1994 through 2000 model years to secure those indestructible forged rods. Even an engine this robust has its quirks, but the beauty of the 7.3 is the sharp contrast between a terrifying symptom and a dead simple solution. The number one reason these trucks get towed into my shop is a complete failure to start or a sudden, scary stall at highway speeds. Owners panic, assuming their high-pressure system just imploded. In reality, it is almost always just a failed camshaft position sensor, or CPS. This tiny sensor sits on the front of the engine, telling the computer exactly when to fire the injectors. When it dies, the engine goes completely dark. I tell every single 7.3 owner to buy a genuine $30 OEM sensor and keep it in their glove box with a 10mm wrench. You can swap it on the side of the road in 5 minutes flat. When you are looking at a truck that the seller claims needs a whole new engine because it won't start, look at the tachometer while you crank it over. If that needle sits dead at 0, the computer isn't seeing the camshaft. That is a $30 fix disguised as a catastrophic failure, and you can use that exact knowledge to slice thousands of dollars off the asking price. Next, you need to pop the hood and look directly into the deep valley between the cylinder heads. You will often see a terrifying puddle of black oil pooling down there, and an untrustworthy shop will quote you thousands to pull the motor. Don't fall for it. The 7.3 is notorious for weeping oil from the H-pop fittings, the turbocharger pedestal O-rings, or the injector pressure regulator valve. These are simple, cheap rubber seals that bake over 25 years of heat cycles. You can buy a complete reseal kit for under $50 and fix it in your driveway over a weekend. However, you must combine that visual inspection with a strict cold start test. Make sure the engine hasn't been warmed up before you arrive. When you twist that key, you want to see how quickly it fires and what comes out of the tailpipe. Heavy, persistent white smoke that smells like raw fuel after the engine warms up means you are dealing with burnt-out glow plugs, leaking injector cups, or tired injectors that can't atomize fuel. If it blows heavy blue smoke, the turbocharger seals are shot, or the internal injector O-rings are bypassing oil directly into the fuel system. A healthy 7.3 should bark to life instantly, even on a freezing morning, and clear its throat into a steady, rhythmic idle within 60 seconds. You also have to look beneath the surface, because a bulletproof engine means nothing if the chassis holding it together is structural dust. Road salt is the ultimate silent killer of these trucks. I have seen pristine-looking bodies hiding frame rails that flake away like pastry dough. Take a screwdriver and aggressively poke the metal frame rails near the rear leaf spring hangers. If the metal is solid, you are golden. If your screwdriver punches right through the steel, walk away immediately, because a rotted rig frame makes the vehicle completely uneconomical to repair, no matter how perfectly the engine runs. If the frame is rock solid and the cold start is clean, you need to check the transmission. The older OBS trucks run the E4OD automatic, which desperately needs an aftermarket fluid cooler if you plan to tow heavy loads. The later Super Duty trucks receive the upgraded 4R100 transmission, which is far more durable but still relies heavily on clean fluid. Pull that dipstick. If the fluid is dark brown and smells like a burnt campfire, that transmission has been cooked under heavy loads and is living on borrowed time. Factor a transmission rebuild into your budget right from the start. The real secret to unlocking another 300,000 miles out of a cheap 7.3 lies entirely in its oil maintenance history. Because the HEUI system utilizes engine oil as a hydraulic fluid to physically slam the fuel injectors open, dirty oil will literally destroy your fuel system efficiency before it ever damages your mechanical bearings. An owner who cheaped out on maintenance and skipped oil changes will leave behind a sludged-up high-pressure system that idles rough and lacks pulling power. But if you find a truck owned by a farmer or contractor who strictly changed that massive 15-quart oil capacity every 5,000 miles, you are buying an engine with internal tolerances that are still factory fresh. These honest, hardworking trucks are still hiding in plain sight on rural Craigslist pages. Facebook Marketplace, and small agricultural estate auctions. The untrained public sees a beat-up work vehicle with high mileage and a faded bed, but now you know exactly how to spot the million-mile mechanical masterpiece hiding underneath that weathered paint. You know how to verify the forged rods, how to read the smoke coming from the exhaust, and how to spot a simple oil leak that can save you thousands during negotiations. But your pre-purchase inspection isn't fully complete yet, because there are still several critical, hidden factory settings and fragile electrical pathways on these trucks that can quietly leave you stranded if you don't know exactly where to look. You now know how a $30 camshaft position sensor or a simple rubber O-ring leak can mimic a catastrophic engine failure on these old trucks, allowing you to steal them right out from under the noses of unsuspecting sellers. But those minor electrical gremlins and top-end weepages are nothing compared to the true, silent killer lurking inside the factory configuration of the 7.3-liter Power Stroke. There is a second, deeply buried factory setting that Ford left completely unchecked from 1994 all the way through 2003, a setting that is actively, aggressively eating these engines from the inside out and turning pristine, low-mileage cylinder blocks into porous, unfixable junk. I am talking about a hidden chemical warfare happening inside your cooling system known as cavitation. It is the single most destructive force acting on a 7.3-liter engine block, and 90% of owners have absolutely no idea it is happening until their coolant reservoir fills up with engine oil and their motor is completely ruined. To understand why this happens, you have to look at the sheer physics of a massive, heavy-duty diesel engine. Unlike a smooth, low-compression gasoline motor, a diesel engine operates under extreme cylinder pressures. Every single time fuel ignites inside a 7.3 cylinder, a violent, high-intensity shockwave tears through the cast iron cylinder wall. That cast iron is incredibly thick, but the sheer energy of that combustion causes the cylinder wall to microscopically flex and vibrate like a massive tuning fork. Now think about what is sitting directly on the other side of that vibrating iron wall: your engine coolant. As the cylinder wall flexes rapidly inward, away from the coolant, it creates a localized, instantaneous drop in pressure. This sudden vacuum causes the liquid coolant right against the iron surface to flash boil, creating millions of microscopic vapor bubbles. But the cycle doesn't stop there. An instant later, the cylinder wall violently flexes back outward, slammed by the next combustion event. This sudden, massive spike in pressure forces those millions of tiny vapor bubbles to violently implode right against the cast iron. You might think a tiny bubble popping wouldn't hurt a heavy cast iron engine block, but Ford's engineers underestimated the sheer, localized violence of fluid dynamics. When those microscopic bubbles collapse, they don't just pop smoothly. They implode with such concentrated force that they generate localized pressures exceeding 15,000 pounds per square inch, accompanied by temperatures soaring into thousands of degrees. This creates a microscopic, high-velocity liquid jet that slams directly into the cast iron, blasting a tiny molecule of metal right off the cylinder wall. This isn't a process that happens overnight. It is a slow, relentless, microscopic drilling process. Over 100,000 miles of driving, these millions of continuous implosions act like a tiny, high-powered plasma torch, digging microscopic pits deeper and deeper into the thrust side of your cylinder walls. Eventually, one of those tiny pits drills completely through the thick cast iron, opening up a direct, microscopic highway between your combustion chamber and your cooling jacket. Once that happens, game over. Coolant floods your oiling system, destroying your engine bearings, or compression gases pressurize your cooling system, blowing your radiator hoses apart. I have torn down blocks where the cylinder walls looked perfectly fine from the inside. But the moment I pressed the sleeves out, the back sides looked like a piece of cheap Swiss cheese eaten away by termites. I had a 2000 Super Duty come into my shop about 18 months ago, owned by a guy who thought he bought the ultimate garage queen. It was a beautiful, rust-free truck, with only 112,000 original miles. The owner had spent nearly $20,000 on it, bragging about how the original factory green coolant was still crystal clear. He brought it to me because he noticed a faint puff of white smoke on startup and a strange, sweet smell in the exhaust. I hooked up a cooling system pressure tester, pumped it up to 16 psi, and let it sit overnight. The next morning, I pulled the glow plugs and cranked the motor over. Coolant shot out of cylinder number 8 like a geyser. When I pulled that engine apart and looked down into the water jacket with a borescope, I saw the tragic reality. The previous owner had meticulously changed the oil, but he never touched the cooling system, thinking clean-looking fluid meant healthy fluid. That factory green coolant had completely depleted its chemical additives, allowing cavitation to drill a pinhole straight through the cylinder wall of an otherwise perfect, low-mileage engine. That beautiful block was reduced to scrap metal, all because of a lack of a simple $10 chemical additive. This brings us to the ultimate failure of Ford's factory documentation. When these trucks rolled off the assembly line, Ford filled them with standard, automotive-grade green ethylene glycol coolant. But they failed to properly educate the consumer on how to maintain a heavy-duty wet sleeve or heavy-wall diesel block. Standard green coolant does absolutely nothing to protect against cavitation. To prevent those microscopic bubbles from blasting away your cast iron, you must maintain a precise chemical barrier on the outside of the cylinder walls. This barrier is created by supplemental coolant additives, or SCAs, specifically nitrite. When you add nitrites to your cooling system, they react with the cast iron to form a tough, microscopic sacrificial oxide film over the metal. When those vapor bubbles implode, they blast away at that cheap, renewable chemical film instead of digging pits into your irreplaceable cast iron. As you drive, the chemicals in the coolant naturally repair that film, keeping your cylinder walls completely shielded from destruction. If you are out tracking down a used 7.3-liter truck, you cannot just look at the oil dipstick and the body panels. You have to walk up to that truck carrying a pack of diesel coolant test strips. Pop the radiator cap when the engine is cold, dip the strip into the coolant, and compare the color gradient to the bottle chart. You are looking specifically for the level of nitrites in parts per million. If the test strip shows 0 nitrites and the owner admits he has just been throwing standard green antifreeze from the local auto parts store into it for the last 10 years, you are looking at a ticking time bomb. The engine might run beautifully right now, but cavitation could be 90% of the way through that cylinder wall, waiting to break through under your ownership. If you test the coolant and find the CA levels are depleted, but the truck passes every other test and runs perfectly, you don't necessarily have to walk away, but you must act immediately the moment you log the title in your name. You have 2 highly effective paths to completely neutralize this silent killer and save your engine from a slow, watery death. The first method is the old-school fleet maintenance route. You can thoroughly flush out the old, contaminated fluid and refill the system with fresh premium conventional green coolant, then manually add a bottle of Motorcraft VC8 or Wix coolant additive. If you choose this route, you must remain incredibly disciplined. You will have to test that coolant with a fresh test strip every single oil change, constantly adding small amounts of SCA to replenish the sacrificial barrier as it wears away. The second, far superior method, and the one I perform on every single 7.3 that rolls through my shop bays, is to completely upgrade the truck to a modern heavy-duty extended life coolant, commonly known as ELC. You want to look for a formulation that meets the strict Caterpillar EC1 specification. These modern red coolants do away with traditional nitrites entirely, utilizing advanced organic acid technology to create a significantly more durable, permanent protective layer over the cast iron. An EC1-rated ELC doesn't deplete its additives over time like old-school green coolant does. Once you perform a flawless, deep chemical flush of your cooling system with distilled water to remove every single trace of the old green fluid, you drop in the red ELC. And your engine block is fully protected against cavitation for the next 300,000 miles or 6 years without ever needing a single test strip or booster bottle. It completely deletes the vulnerability from your engine's architecture. But do not think for a second that stabilizing your cooling system means you are completely out of the woods. While cavitation is busiest attacking the lower half of your engine block, there is another deeply rooted factory configuration further up on the chassis that is quietly waiting to starve your unkillable engine of its lifeblood, suffocating your fuel system and causing mysterious performance drops that drive even veteran mechanics completely insane. By now, you know how to roadside fix a dead camshaft position sensor. You know how to identify and seal top-end oil valley leaks. And you know how to use a $10 pack of test strips to prevent cavitation from drilling a chemical pinhole straight through your cylinder walls. But there is a third, incredibly deceptive factory configuration that Ford engineered right into the chassis of these trucks. A flaw that lives entirely out of sight, deep inside the dark recesses of your fuel tanks. It is a hidden, ticking time bomb that quietly suffocates your high-pressure fuel system, introduces destructive air bubbles into your expensive 8UI injectors, and causes a mysterious, creeping loss of power that has forced thousands of frustrated owners to misdiagnose their trucks and waste thousands of dollars replacing perfectly good parts. I am talking about the catastrophic degradation of the factory fuel pickup foot inside the diesel tank, combined with the presence of highly restrictive mixing chambers and fragile quick-connect fittings on the suction side of your fuel system. We call it the hutch and harpoon vulnerability, and if you drive a 25-year-old 7.3-liter truck that hasn't had this factory setup deleted, your engine is actively starving for fuel every single time you hit the throttle. To understand why this factory configuration is so fundamentally flawed, we have to crawl underneath the truck and look at how Ford designed the fuel sending unit. Inside that plastic fuel tank, the main fuel suction line drops down into a small plastic fuel pickup foot. This foot is made of a soft, porous, umbrella-shaped rubber compound designed to sit flat against the bottom of the tank so it can scavenge every last drop of diesel. But over 25 years of constant exposure to modern ultra-low sulfur diesel and aggressive biodiesel blends, that factory rubber compound undergoes a severe chemical breakdown. It undergoes a process called embrittlement, becoming as fragile and brittle as an eggshell. I have dropped hundreds of these tanks over my career, and the story is always exactly the same. You drop the tank, pull the sending unit assembly, and find that the rubber pickup foot has completely snapped off and disintegrated into 100 tiny pieces that are rolling around at the bottom of your fuel tank. The moment that foot breaks off, two severe mechanical problems happen instantly. First, you lose your physical reach to the bottom of the tank. Your open metal suction tube is now floating nearly 2 to 3 inches above the tank floor. This is why you see thousands of 7.3 owners complaining on forums that their truck suddenly sputters, coughs, and completely runs out of fuel the exact moment their fuel gauge drops down to a quarter of a tank. They think their fuel sending unit is broken, but in reality, their pickup tube is literally sucking empty air while floating above 2 inches of perfectly good diesel fuel. But the second problem is far more destructive to your fuel injectors. With that factory rubber foot missing, your open suction line is now pulling raw, unscreened debris directly into the fuel system. To make matters worse, Ford installed 2 tiny, microscopic fine mesh screens inside a small plastic mixing chamber right on the fuel sending unit frame inside the tank. As the broken debris from your disintegrated pickup foot sloshes around, it gets sucked into these tiny internal screens, slowly plastering them shut with a thick layer of black grime and tank sludge as those internal screens clog up. Your frame-mounted electric fuel lift pump has to work twice as hard to draw fuel all the way from the back of the truck. This massive restriction creates a severe vacuum inside the long factory supply line. In fluid dynamics, when you apply a heavy vacuum to a liquid like diesel fuel, you lower its boiling point, causing it to undergo an operational phenomenon called entrained air release. The fuel literally begins to separate, releasing tiny microbubbles of trapped air and vapor right out of the liquid suspension. This problem is violently magnified by the factory quick connect fuel line fittings that Ford used along the frame rail. These fittings utilize a simple internal rubber O-ring that is designed to seal against positive pressure pushing outward. But under the heavy vacuum created by those clogged tank screens, those factory fittings act like a straw with a tiny pinhole crack in it. They don't leak fuel outward onto the ground, so you will never see a puddle on your driveway. Instead, they stealthily draw outside atmospheric air inward, pulling air bubbles straight into the fuel stream. This is where the true damage happens. Remember, your HEUI injection system relies on a solid, unyielding column of fluid to multiply pressure. When that aerated, bubble-filled fuel finally reaches your cylinder head fuel galleries, those tiny air bubbles enter the injector bodies. Unlike liquid diesel fuel, air is highly compressible. When the injector plunger slams down to generate 21,000 psi of injection pressure, that pocket of air compresses like a cushion. This completely ruins your injection timing, delays your fuel atomization, and creates a severe localized mechanical shock wave inside the injector nozzle tip. The injector physically dries out, losing its critical cushion of fluid lubrication. Over time, this constant aeration scores the internal plungers, erodes the injector nozzle seats, and completely burns out your expensive injectors, all while causing a rough, idle, excessive cackle noise and a sluggish throttle response that standard diagnostic scanners cannot track down. I had a customer bring his 1999 F-250 into my shop. After 3 different diesel specialty shops, told him he needed a brand new set of 8 fuel injectors. A repair that would have easily set him back $3,000. The truck idled like a paint shaker and had zero power pulling a trailer up a hill. Instead of blindly throwing parts at it, I hooked up a temporary length of clear, marine-grade vinyl fuel hose directly to the inlet side of his fuel pump and started the truck. Through that clear line, I could see a continuous stream of massive air bubbles screaming down the line from the fuel tank. I dropped his fuel tank, and sure enough, his pickup foot was completely gone, and the internal mixing screens were entirely choked out with black slime. I charged him for 2 hours of labor, performed a full factory fuel system delete, and the truck smoothed out into a dead silent, factory-fresh idle using his original injectors. He left my shop saving thousands of dollars, completely blown away by how a hidden, simple mechanical restriction could completely cripple a legendary engine. To permanently cure this factory oversight and bulletproof your truck for the next 1,000,000 miles, you have to execute a comprehensive, unified strategy that ties together every single mechanical lesson we have covered. You cannot just fix one system and ignore the others. You must approach the 7.3-liter Power Stroke with a complete 3-step prevention methodology. First, you execute the Hutch and Harpoon modifications to permanently delete the factory fuel tank restrictions. You drop the tank, cut out the restrictive internal mixing chambers, and remove those fragile factory quick connect lines. You replace the broken factory foot with a heavy-duty, stainless steel compression extension tube that reaches perfectly to the dead center floor of the tank. You then route a solid, continuous length of heavy-duty, half-inch fuel-rated hose from the tank directly to the input of your fuel pump, installing a large, easily serviceable spin-on water separator filter right on the frame rail before the pump. This completely eliminates any possibility of vacuum leaks, stops air from entering your fuel stream, and guarantees your injectors receive a flawless, high-volume supply of pure, solid diesel. Second, you immediately stabilize the chemical makeup of your cooling system to permanently halt cavitation. Do not guess, and do not trust clear-looking green fluid. Perform a deep chemical flush of the cooling system using distilled water until it drains completely clear. Then drop in a premium heavy-duty extended life coolant that meets the rigorous Caterpillar EC1 specification. This permanently encases your cylinder walls in a tough, microscopic organic acid shield that eliminates the need for manual additives or testing strips forever. Third, you stabilize your top-end high-pressure oil system. Swap out your old, brittle camshaft position sensor with a brand new, genuine Ford OEM unit and put a spare sensor directly into your glove box with a 10mm wrench so you can never be stranded roadside. Inspect your top-end valley for O-ring leaks at the H-pop and the turbo pedestal. Reseal them with premium Viton replacements. and commit to a strict 5,000-mile oil change interval using a high-quality 15W40 heavy-duty diesel oil to keep your hydraulic injection pressures rock solid. When you synthesize these three insider strategies, you create an absolute fortress around your engine. You protect the bottom end from chemical erosion, you secure the top end from electrical and oil delivery failures, and you supply the fuel system with pure, air-free fuel. That is how you transform a cheap, auction-bought work truck into an immortal heavy-duty machine that will easily outlast, out-tow, and outrun any $80,000 electronic nightmare sitting on a modern dealership lot. If you found this unfiltered, real-world mechanical breakdown genuinely valuable, do me a massive favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and smash the notification bell right now. I don't give you generic internet advice. I give you real shop floor knowledge gained from 15 years of tearing down these trucks, saving you thousands of dollars in unnecessary repairs. Drop a comment below telling me exactly how many miles are on your 7.3-liter truck, or share the craziest mechanical failure a dealership tried to upsell you on. I read every single comment, and I will see you in the next breakdown.